part of the prevailing economic woes facing Nigeria's economy, the Central Bank of Nigeria, in its first Monetary Policy Committee meeting for the year, decided to increase the monetary policy rate benchmark, also known as the interest rates, from 16.5% to 17.5% in a bid to take further rise in inflation, tackle further rise in inflation, and leaving all the parameters unchanged. The latest increase in the MPR represents the highest rate in over 21 years since 2001, when the benchmark interest rate averaged 20.5%, representing the fifth consecutive increment in the month under review. Addressing journalists at the Apex Bank headquarters in Abuja yesterday, the governor of the Apex Bank, Mr. Gordon Emefiele, disclosed that the committee welcomed the recent deceleration in the nation's inflation rates, noting that the persistence in the policy rate increase over the last few meetings of the committee had started to yield expected decline in inflation.
MPs voted to 1. Raise MPR to 17.5%, 2. Retain the asymmetric corridor at plus 100 and minus 700 basis points around the corridor, and 3. Retain the CRR at 2.5%, and 4. Retain the liquidity ratio at 30%. Unfortunately, I don't have good news for those who feel that we should shift the deadline. My apologies. The reason is because, just like the president had said on more than 2 occasions, and even to people privately, that for us 90 days, in fact, we feel it's 100 days is enough for anybody who has money or the old currency to deposit the money in the banks.
Well, let's talk more on this, of course, in light of macroeconomic fundamentals. And to do justice to this, I'm being joined live via Zoom by fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. Mr. Oyedele, thank you so much for your time. It's good to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, Tolu, for having me.
Yes, well, it's no more news that the MPR now stands at 17.5%. The CBN governor made that known to us yesterday after the 2-day meeting. But first, maybe I should just ask, what were you expecting? Were you expecting a bold step? Because some say it seems to be a very, very bold step by the Apex Bank, despite the deceleration we saw in the month of December in inflation.
Yes. I think, maybe I'll describe it differently. I'll say it's an aggressive position. I was not expecting that there will be a further increase because there have been, before the recent announcement and the increase by 100 basis points, before then we've had increases of 500 basis points in under 10 months, which is very significant. So this adds on to it. And I think the only reason that the Monetary Policy Committee gave for that increase is inflation. They want to be able to control inflation, even though it seems like the inflation is beginning to moderate, but it's so insignificant and they don't want to rely on that. There were also comments about, why don't you allow the increases we've made in the past to actually have the effects that we want it to have, because it takes time. It's not like you adjust interest rates today and inflation comes down the following day. But what I find even more fascinating is that the MPC gave the reasons for why inflation is rising. And that, in their view, includes energy, petrol, and diesel. More recently, not only is the price of petrol going up, it's even scarce to find. And they also talk about election-related spending. They also talk about the fact that Naira is depreciating, which simply means that for those who import materials and other inputs into their production process, they see their costs go up for reasons that they cannot control. Now, when you identify all of that, you then have to ask yourself, which of these factors that are pushing inflation up? Remember also that food inflation is a big component, and for the past many years now, we've seen inflation of food inflation even higher than the consumer price inflation generally. So when you now look at all of these factors, you're going to ask yourself, which of these problems with higher interest rates going to solve? So if you increase interest rates, would it make the energy cost to be lower? The answer is no. If you increase the interest rates, would this stop election spending? Maybe not. Or how about Naira that is weak? Would it not be weak anymore? Because our interest rate has not been attractive enough in terms of within the context of the risk within the environment to attract FPI, foreign portfolio investment. What you tend to find generally around the world is when you increase interest rates, more money flows in your direction. It has not been coming in that direction, so Naira remains weak. And then overall, this simply means that our inflation is a cost push inflation, which means the price of goods and services are going up because the cost of producing them are also going up. Once you have energy, issues with diesel and petrol, transportation will go up. I have to sell my products and recover my costs and make some small margin, so my price would also go up. So when you have a cost push inflation like that, but you then say, well, let's keep tightening so that we can reduce liquidity. The question is, are we really prescribing the right solutions to the problems that we have? Because if you have a disconnect between the ailment and the prescription, then disease will not go away. That's why we have seen, in my view, very little, moderation in inflation, despite these very aggressive increases in the MPR.
But let's talk about the fuel scarcity, which we've seen in recent times. And you also mentioned high energy costs. We've seen what's happening with aviation fuel, the exchange rate crisis, all of this insecurity. They were all highlighted yesterday. So do you think that we could still maintain that decline in inflation as we move on, expecting January figures early in February?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because at the end of the day, we can raise the interest rates to whatever we like. If people still can't find petrol to buy at a decent price, and diesel is still at 700, 800, depending on where you're buying it from, the reality is that the cost of transportation will remain high. Haulage, I even shared recently on my social media account, someone who had compiled the various taxes they had paid just to move goods from one location to another. A haulage vehicle, this is not a private jet, and over 70 different taxes from local government to state to all manners of people collecting those taxes, just one vehicle to transport goods from one location to another. And then we're surprised that there's high food inflation. How is that person supposed to cover their costs? Won't they recover all those taxes from the end users and the consumers? The answer is yes, they will. And the sad thing is that those taxes are being collected and they're not even getting to government. So to your question, if energy crisis continues, we don't have enough petrol, those who can find petrol, the prices are much higher than it's meant to be. The price of diesel continues to be high. And then you continue to have all these taxes compounding the problem we have with costs. In addition to that, you also have the logistics. So even just moving things from one place to another because of insecurity, because of bad roads, adding on top of that. And if you don't have enough production and supply of food inflation will remain high. So at the end of the day, whether the inflation rate will moderate further, or whether it will continue to increase, I don't think it has everything to do with the interest rate that they have increased, but everything, in my view, to do with those causative factors, particularly energy costs, particularly transportation costs, particularly FX, which is resulting in the weak Naira and giving us imported inflation. So I think we have to re-strategize. In fairness to the monetary policy authorities, there has to be a complementary measure, not just even one. There have to be complementary measures from the fiscal side of things. If you think about the fact that the same government that is trying to moderate inflation is the one borrowing so much from the central bank by way of ways and means, right? CBN overdraft to the tune of about 24 trillion. So that in itself is fueling inflation. If you look at the budget for 2023, Deficit is over 10 trillion. That's also going to fuel inflation. So on one hand, we seem to be introducing conflicting and contradictory policy intervention to address the problem, and then we are surprised that it's not working. So these things need to work together. Even still on the fiscal side, if you think about our policy around importation, we have so many things that are banned. During the Christmas period, we saw in the news, rice were, bags and bags of rice were impounded. And I keep saying to myself, it's good to produce your rice locally, but why don't you make an estimation about your consumption need versus what you are producing? If what you are producing is not up to your consumption, you should allow the difference to be imported. In the meantime, while you work over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to be able to produce enough and even export. But if you say no importation at all, and your production is not sufficient, you invite inflation. That's just economics 101. The price will go up. If the price goes up, whether you raise MPR or reduce MPR, inflation will show up. So, and also in many countries, particularly developed countries, the reason why raising their own interest rate will work is that those economies rely on credit. So people get a mortgage to buy a house. When the interest rate is going up, their monthly mortgage goes up. They immediately feel the impact. They use credit card to buy, food, to buy equipment, to buy gadgets. When the interest rate goes up, the interest they pay goes up, they spend less. And then people who even have surplus money will be attracted to the fact that interest rates on savings has gone up, and they will want to save rather than spend. And then spending and consumption goes down, and if inflation is reduced. But in Nigeria, we don't have a lot of credit within the system. And therefore, even for people that have money, would they want to save? Maybe not, because the savings, interest rates on savings in Nigeria is just about 4%. On treasury bills, the rate is between 2 to 6%. Even government bond, even the 40 years bond that they want to use to securitize ways and means, they're looking at 9%. So with those kind of interest rate that is much lower than inflation, giving you negative real returns on investment, nobody is really motivated to save. Therefore, these tools are not really as effective as they should, and therefore we have to have a rethink as to our approach towards fighting inflation and ensuring price stability.
Great stuff there. The CBN governor also pointed out to the fact that there will be no extension, or there might be no extension of the January 31st deadline for the old notes, and they will retire those notes by that time, saying that about 3.23 trillion naira, according to him, is in circulation, and they've recovered almost 2 trillion out of that. But my question really, he says, this is affecting the efficacy of monetary policy. I really don't understand what it means if we get all of this money is into the CBN's votes. What positives does it mean for us as Nigerians?
Yeah, I have a slightly different, view of what the CBN and the MPC are saying. So regarding the amount of naira, or put differently, currency in circulation. So they said it was about 3.2 trillion. But you have to ask yourself, what is the percentage of that to total money supply? So money supply in Nigeria is about 50 trillion. So which means money everywhere, including electronic money, is about 50 trillion. The cash component of it, the naira notes around, is what they estimated to be about 3.2 trillion, of which they said they have been able to, track and identify and collect about 2 trillion. So it's possible that there is 1.2 trillion that is somewhere. It could be illicit money that they don't want to bring out. It could be money with very poor people where they're keeping it under their pillow and they don't trust whatever we're saying, or they're not even aware. It could also be that those monies have been spoiled. It could have been damaged, whatever it is. I don't think the biggest issue is that we have a lot of cash out of the banking system. I think the problem is that we have cash that we cannot track and trace to people, and we don't know the source of their money. America has more dollar printed currency in circulation per person for every single person on earth. So take dollar, we know it's a global currency, divide the cash dollars in the circulation with the number of 8 billion people on earth, the amount you get is more than if you divide 3.2 trillion naira by the amount of the population of Nigeria. So that's not the biggest problem we have. Even most developed countries have a lot of cash in circulation. So what we are struggling with is how do you identify who has which money so that, of course, you reduce, terrorism financing, you reduce corruption, and also mobilize resources for taxation. If somebody is making a lot of money, whether they can explain the source or not, have they paid taxes on it? So the CBN saying that they're not going to extend the deadline for me, I don't think that's the issue. The issue is what has the CBN done to ensure that everybody that needs to have access to the new notes has access to it. Now, he said he will withdraw 2 trillion of the old notes. You have not told us how much of the new notes you have printed. You have not told us how much of the new notes you printed you have successfully circulated. So we cannot just punish Nigerians and assume that they are stubborn people, they don't like cashless economy, so they should lose their money. I think that would be so unfair. There are villages where they haven't seen, not to talk about touching the currency. Even myself, that I'm in Lagos, I went to the ATM yesterday to try and withdraw. After I did 20,000, it says I had exceeded my limit. So we can't. I don't think this is the right way to go. Different countries, some of them will run in parallel for more than 6 months. So whatever it is we're trying to accomplish, it's not a matter of 6 months. I'm not suggesting that, but it's a matter of milestones. Have you been able to distribute the money sufficiently for people who have legitimate means to hold the money to be able to have access to it? And if there are people who are trying to hold it, do you have the intelligence and the data to identify them so that we can prosecute them? Because this time around, it's not about the fact that they are holding the money. We need to know who they are, what the intentions are, why are they hiding the money, and they need to pay for doing that and face the wrath of the law. That would be my own recommendation to the CBN.
Well, very, very interesting stuff. But let's wrap up with some global issues, of course, also raised in that speech by the central bank governor, how they affect Nigeria. What are you thinking? The war in Ukraine is still there. China's COVID-19 cases, even the United States, the growth prospects not looking so good. What impact could all of this have on our own projection too as a country?
Certainly, we're not, we don't live in an island, and Nigeria is not excluded from global events, geopolitics, political economy. They're all over the place. So, of course, Russia, Ukraine happened last year, and in my view was the biggest event of 2022. Nobody thought it would last as long as it has lasted, almost getting to 1 year now. It doesn't seem it's going to end anytime soon. So, which means we continue to have, even though I'll say the world is better prepared now to deal with it, Europe, I learned, has been able to, cut off their reliance on gas from Russia. A number of countries are no longer buying their crude oil. But some of us have not been able to cut ourselves off the reliance on food, coming from Ukraine and Russia. So that's continuing to have an impact on food inflation. So that would have impact on us, this year. China reopening, because the COVID resurgence that we're beginning to see, thank God it's not fatal as yet. Hopefully there won't be another variant. Because what you don't want to get to is for the whole world to start locking their borders to say you can't come in, before you come in, you do X, Y, Z. Remember that this COVID itself was the reason why we got into the point where CBN were printing money and sending to people to spend, that led to the inflation that we are now dealing with. We have not even recovered from it. We can't afford to go into another set of lockdowns inspired by or triggered by COVID-19. Of course, I don't think there will be ever a time when everything in the whole world will just be peaceful and what we want it to be, right? If it's not, US and China with their tension, Russia and Ukraine, or it might be Israel and the Pakistans. So it's always something happening one way or the other. But as a country, what you have to do is to say, how do I become self-reliant in the most important areas? In my view, those areas will be food, those areas will be energy security, those areas will be healthcare. A country must be able to take care of itself in those 3 areas. If you are relying on another country to send you mobile phones and they are not sending it, heaven will not fall. But when you can't find food to eat, particularly in a country where you have 133 million people living in multidimensional poverty, that in itself is, I think, is is a war or a bomb waiting to explode. You can't afford to have, young, energetic people who are hungry and they seem hopeless. Anything can go wrong anytime. So you have to deal with that. We have to focus first and foremost as a country on the things we can control. We can control our monetary policy. We can control our fiscal policy. We can deal with our insecurity. We can provide better leadership. We can provide enabling environment for businesses to thrive. All those things are within our control. It has nothing to do with Russia and the US and China. Let's deal with that first. And in my view, those self-inflicted issues or pain are more than half of what we're dealing with. The Russia, Ukraine, and the rest of them, in my view, are less than half of it. So which means if you deal with what is within your control today, Nigeria will be a lot better than what we are having to deal with. And the rest of it will be, something that we then hope and pray that the rest of the world will play their part.
I must thank you so much for your time. Mr. Taiwo Yedele is fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Do enjoy the rest of your day. We appreciate your contributions.
Thank you for having me.